Welcome to Coffee with Kupke, a production of St. Paul Inside the Walls. Here on Coffee with Kupke, we grab a cup of coffee, at least we're claiming this is coffee. We sit with Monsignor Raymond Kupke, the pastor of St. Anthony's in Hawthorne, professor at Immaculate Conception Seminary, diocesan archivist. We sit with Monsignor Kupke to delve into the history of Catholicism in the Diocese of Paterson. My name is Father Paul Manning. I am the vicar for Evangelization for the Diocese of Paterson. So grab your cup of coffee and let's jump right in. I'm going to take a sip. We are really thoroughly looking at this period of the church's growth in the 19th century. So there's just two other things that I wanted to ask you about. The first is this little interesting paragraph, couple of sentences about forgotten Germans in Macopen. So can you say a little bit about that German community?
Yeah, the early, mostly German iron mining community up in West Milford, Macopen. They remain in place right down to the present day. I mean, there are a number of very proud descendants of those families still active. You and I know one of them, oddly enough. Karl Grau is a direct lineal descendant of one of those early families.
Interesting.
After Father Farmer dies, and this is why they are the oldest Catholic church in New Jersey, because they never lose their identity. They keep on getting together on Sunday, praying the rosary. They connect ultimately with priests in the city who come up routinely and visit them. And then ultimately when the Franciscans arrive in Butler, they begin to get regular weekend assistance. But they build a church up there as early as 1829. So they're very much on the map, and they continue to be on the map.
But are they preserving the faith without priestly support for a while?
With only sporadic priestly support. I mean, basically, Farmer only visited them twice a year.
Okay.
And so they continue to keep things going. They're remarkable.
Yes.
My favorite thing about them is that they lost contact about where they came from in Germany.
Right.
And there are a number of semi-professional family genealogists among that crowd.
Right.
Who for years were trying to trace them back to Germany, but they could never make the leap across the ocean.
And they found it through your book.
But my book, yes, a German historian who was doing research on the collapse of the iron industry in Germany in the 18th century.
Right.
Somebody knew about my book and said, there are German guys in...
Right.
And so...
Yeah, that was, if you missed it, that was episode 2, I think, when we talked about that.
So basically...
Maybe the first episode. I can't remember.
They came from the Saarland region of Germany.
Right. At the very end of that chapter, you have a pen and ink drawing. Who did the pen and ink drawings for Living Stones?
A art student at Seton Hall, Matt Hamilton.
And you happened to know him and asked him to...
I knew the art professor at Seton Hall, Edward Havis, from Persephone, and he put me in contact with
Matt, did you say? Yeah. So there's a picture of Julia Seeholster, teaching catechism, I believe.
Yeah.
In what community was she?
This would be West Milford.
Okay. Yeah. And so we have this image of a lay woman catechist from the early 19th century. Yeah. Even I think we tend to think of lay leadership as something that developed after Vatican II, but so much of the church and the life of the church was carried on by lay people in the early part of the...
Sure, because the priests were so few and far between that they were almost like circuit riders.
Yes.
So the stable leadership would be lay people.
Yes.
And they're an interesting group of characters. We could do a whole. We don't know great depth of detail about them, but the little vignettes, for example, St. Anthony's in Butler, which goes back to the 1870s, late 1860s. Basically, one of the women in the community that ran a tavern kept a jar on the bar for donations to building a Catholic church in
Yes,
Butler. It was that kind of. But the earliest one, oddly enough, and again, we rely on farmers' baptismal registers for so much information.
Oh, the gentleman who baptized.
Right.
Yeah. If I know this is putting you on the spot, and if it takes him too long to answer this, we can edit out the long pause. But if you had to name 3 to 5 most influential lay women in the diocese.
Not nuns.
No. Does anybody come to mind, 3 to 5? And maybe we can talk about them now or do it in another episode.
Well, Julia Seeholster.
Julia,
in this early colonial period.
Right.
Jane Wall in Paterson in the late 1800s. Wall Street in Paterson is named after her. And her family is a major player in the development of St. Teresa's in Paterson. In Madison, several of the French women are very important in keeping those families together, but also in directing family fortunes to St. Vincent's.
Okay. Wow. Yes.
So there are a number of.
Any more recent towering figures?
Callie Barrett.
I know the name.
At St. Paul's in Clifton, the first female trustee, parish trustee in New Jersey.
What year would that have been?
This would be the 1970s, 60s.
Okay.
She was appointed by Monsignor Redimer when he was pastor.
The first woman. Yeah, interesting.
So there are a number of.
So maybe we'll do down the road. We'll do an episode on the towering lay men and women and men.
Yeah, Pat Dolan in Ogdensburg, who single-handedly organized CCD up in Sussex County. Had people going out and bringing kids in on Sunday. There are a lot of heroines.
Yes. Yeah. We want to talk about the cathedral in Paterson, right?
Well, we want to really talk about St. John's.
First.
It's not yet a cathedral.
Okay, so tell us about St. John's.
Well, Paterson was developed right after the Revolution as the first planned industrial city in the United States. They saw the hydroelectric power of the Great Falls in Paterson, and so Alexander Hamilton wanted to develop that. He brought Washington there one day to picnic and look at the falls and say, we could do something with this.
Yeah.
So Paterson is unlike the other cities of the Northeast, like Philadelphia or Boston, New York, that had developed because of their harbor, basically.
Yeah.
Paterson was planned, and the crazy story is that the original street plan for Paterson, they could not actually use it because there wasn't enough of a broad span between the mountain and the river. So they shelved it and used it later. It's the street plan for Washington, D.C.
Oh, wow.
That crazy pattern of circles.
Yeah, and diagonals.
Yes, yeah.
Who's the designer?
I think...
I feel like I should know the name.
The guy who
did D.C.
Yeah.
Somebody out there is going to know. Yeah.
So, so Paterson has a Catholic population almost immediately as it's formed.
Yeah. Can I interject here and say, I'm ashamed to say that I had not seen the Great Falls until rather recently. Monsignor Gino Silva and I went and took a little field trip to see the Great Falls. They're not easy to see in Paterson. They're obstructed.
You did not see the episode of The Sopranos.
I did not.
All right.
Did the Great Falls figure in The Sopranos?
Yes, they throw one of the guys over the bridge.
Oh, man. Wow. It must have been a green screen they used or something. Anyway, So I interrupted. We were moving to the Catholic population in Paterson.
So there were some circuit riding priests that were saying Mass in Paterson in the 18 teens in people's houses. But finally, by 1820, it had grown enough that the Bishop of New York sent a full-time priest to Paterson. And this is the first priest to be assigned to New Jersey on a full-time basis.
So this would be one reason, a reason why some might argue that Paterson
St. John's
is first.
is the oldest parish in the state. Yeah. If by parish you mean a place with a resident pastor, St. John's is the oldest.
The title.
There was already a church in Newark the year before, but they had no permanent priest. But the Bishop of New York sent Richard Bolger,
we talked about him.
One of his newly ordained priests to start St.
John's. Yeah. And so
today there's a wonderful Peruvian restaurant on the corner where St. John's originally started downtown.
Right. So that first church lasts how long?
Maybe a decade. It's just
a little wooden structure.
Little wooden structure, and then in 1833, on Oliver Street, they built a new stone church, which is still standing today. If you stand on the steps of the current cathedral and look past the Passaic County Jail across the street, you can see the outline of the second St. John's, basically the Entre Nous building.
Is it a brick
stone?
Okay. I was looking at that the other day, wondering what it was.
That's the back end of the second St. John's.
And what is the Entre Nous?
The Entre Nous became, after the current St. John's was constructed in the 1870s, the Entre Nous became like the parish hall.
Oh, that was the second
church?
church?
And part of the school and a whole bunch of things.
Yeah, so I actually think as Monsignor Silva and his staff opened up the charter school in Paterson, I think Oliver Street is a part of the long-term plan.
We still own that property.
Amazing. So that's a substantial building.
Substantial building. But that only survives as the parish church for like 25 years when Father McNulty comes, William McNulty.
And they need a bigger church.
It's too small, and he does not like it because it's on a side street.
Oh, he wants it on the main street.
Yeah.
Now, this population growth, is this immigrants from where?
Mostly Ireland, but there are some from other places as well. One of the main contributors, this is deja vu all over again, but one of the principal contributors to the construction of the second St. John's is a Spanish family, Joaquin Felix, and they were there in the city
from Spain.
Yes. So there's been a Latino presence in St. John's very early.
Wow, interesting.
And then by 1859, there are enough Germans in Paterson that the second church in the city, St. Boniface.
Boniface, sorry. Yeah.
Which is basically now the Father English Center.
Oh.
That develops very early.
Yeah, that in one of the next episodes, I'm going to ask you about this renewed German connection.
Yeah.
So anything else that you want to say about the cathedral? We will talk about that at length when we get to Dean McNulty, but anything else about this St. John's?
Just that it grew very quickly, and had a succession of pastors, some very, very quickly, some a couple of years. The priest situation was very fluid. Guys were coming from Europe. Sometimes they came with great credentials. Sometimes they came because they didn't know what to do with them in Europe.
Yes.
Or they were disgruntled with their superiors in Europe, and they would just turn up over here. And sometimes they were useful for a while. I think one of St. John's early pastors left to go to the California gold rush. You never knew what you were
Following the
getting.
gold.
Yeah, exactly.
A great vocation for a priest.
Yeah. So there's a lot of back and forth, and this will plague the diocese right through the whole 19th century.
Well, I was thinking as you were speaking that we are a presbyterate made up in large measure of immigrant priests who have decided to minister here in our diocese. So today it's Hispanic.
It hasn't changed much.
And Polish priests who are ministering in our diocese. But is that, for many, when I was young, there were a lot of Irish guys.
Yeah.
There's always been
always been. Our diocese has never produced enough native vocations to really
manage on its own. Okay.
To give you an idea, when the bishop sends the first priest to St. John's, the Diocese of New York at that point was the whole state of New York and the northern half of New Jersey. And he had 8 priests covering this whole territory.
Wow.
So in 1821, in one of the earliest editions of the Catholic Directory, it shows there are 2 priests in Manhattan, 1 in Albany, 1 in Buffalo, 1 in Schenectady, 1 who is listed as traveling up and down the Hudson River, visiting all those little villages, and then 1 in Paterson, New Jersey.
Now
I'm fond of pointing out to Bishop Sweeney that Long Island did not have a resident priest until the following year,
right.
when the first priest in Long Island was assigned to the church where he was ultimately ordained a priest, St. James in Brooklyn.
Yeah. I'm going to digress. I've heard you say that our contemporary experience of many priests, ministering permanently in small communities is a relatively new phenomenon in church history. Maybe say a word about that.
Well, the boom era of the 1940s and 50s produced an enormous number of priests. So that suddenly became the norm, to have that many. But in earlier years, it was much, much more difficult. And much tighter. New England, early enough, some of our earliest priests in the Paterson Diocese, like Frank Murphy and the Wall brothers, were born in Massachusetts. And their diocese, the Springfield Diocese, which then was the western half of Massachusetts, they were producing so many vocations that they were ordaining people and sending them home to live until an opening came up in a rectory. So a number of guys looked at that, when they were in the seminary and said, let me go somewhere where I can at least work.
And they came to Paterson. So we have international immigrants, we have New England.
Yeah, there's always been, the immigrants that have come down and found Paterson to be a fruitful place too.
Yeah. So we talked about Bishop Bailey becoming the first bishop of the Diocese of Newark, which is now the whole state of New Jersey.
Right.
And one thing that I thought was remarkable about him was that he decided that he wanted a seminary.
Yeah,
and then is a school too. Right?
Well, basically, there are three major things that Bailey contributed. He wanted a college, he wanted a seminary, and he wanted nuns. So in the first years of his administration, he founds Seton Hall at Madison originally.
Right down the road.
Right down the road from where we are. And out of that, by the time 4 years later, the first students in his school, one of the original students was from Madison. And the first of those...
Is this a school for boys or a school for girls?
For boys.
Okay. And it's called
Seton Hall College.
And this is college as we know it, or is it high school, or is it seminary? Or
it's funny. Historians at Seton Hall would say that basically what we would call today Seton Hall Prep.
Oh,
Is the only thing that was present in Madison.
yes.
Be based on what they were teaching, what we know of their curriculum. But then within 4 years, the seminary, Immaculate Conception Seminary, dates their founding to 1860, because by 1860, it was clear from their early catalogs that they were teaching theology.
Okay.
So
Now, the definition, the formal proclamation of the Immaculate Conception was what year?
1856. maybe?
Yeah, so was the seminary originally named?
Yeah.
Oh,
yeah.
probably around that same time?
Yeah. Yes, but
Yeah.
but all, muddled together in a way that,
It's hard to...
yeah. Like the president of the university did not stop being president of the prep until it moved off of the campus in the 1980s.
Okay, wow.
So they were still
connected.
Like,
yeah.
if you look at the Seton Hall yearbooks for the 1920s, they are 8-year yearbooks, freshman year of high school through senior year of college.
Okay, wow.
So there's an integral development there that involves all three aspects at the same time.
Yeah, so next time we'll talk a little bit more about Bishop Bailey's promotion of education and recruitment of religious women and a number of other things.
Yeah, Bailey, even though he had to move Seton Hall to South Orange because it was too far out, and he wanted it to be closer to the centers of population, but he always had a fondness for coming up here. And he mentions all the time coming up by sleigh over South Orange Mountain to visit.
That's in
up here.
winters, winter.
Yeah.
Let's leave it there. I want all of you who are listening or watching to make sure that you keep an eye out or an ear out for the next episode of Coffee with Kupke. In order to stay on top of new releases, make sure you follow or subscribe wherever you're listening. And if you are on YouTube, please do drop a like and hit the bell for notifications. While you're at it, make sure to check out the other shows produced by the diocese. Those shows are Beyond the Beacon, hosted by Bishop Kevin Sweeney and Jay Agnish, our Director of Communications, and the Paul Street Journal, hosted by Brian Hansberger and Freddie Garcia. I want to give a special thanks to Joe Ginexi, our sound and visual engineer, Caitlin Ferrari, who's involved in pre- and post-production, and Freddie Garcia, who's helping out with this podcast in addition to doing his own. With all that said, I just want to thank you for joining us in Coffee with Kupke. Keep making Catholic history in the Diocese of Paterson.